Hello everybody, Dave Thomas here again, and this time I'm building the custom rockets spin thing. This is considered a beginner's rocket, although it does have a lot of balsa to it. And so we'll just open this up, take a look. Okay. Looks like some very detailed instructions. Alright, so here's our fin stock, self-adhesive decal, a little parts bag here. This has a balsa nose cone, the launch lug, a thrust ring, screw eye for the nose cone, and the spinnerons, which deflect the air and cause the rocket to spin. Alright, and then we have a body tube, motor spacer, streamer, and an elastic shock cord. This is a minimum diameter rocket, and so should fly fairly high with standard A through C motors. So I'm going to clear this away and we will get started on the first part of the kit. Now, according to the instructions, our first task is to glue in the engine block into the body tube. And so first we need to mark the engine spacer here at 1/4 of an inch from the aft end. And if you're more metrically inclined, that would be 6 millimeters. Alright, so I'm just going to make a little mark right here. Okay, and then we need to put some glue up inside the body tube, and before I do anything else, I'm going to just mark on here aft so I know which end of the rocket I am working on. Okay, and here we can use some wood glue or some white glue, whichever you have available. And here I like to use an applicator. Now we're supposed to have the ring of glue at 2.5 inches inside the body tube. And so I'm just going to take my applicator here and put that up to 2.5 inches at the end, and then use my thumbnail to mark that distance. And then now I can simply pick up some glue here. Alright, and then insert the applicator into the aft end until I hit my thumb against the edge, and then go ahead and rotate that around. Alright, I was a little sloppy there and got some excess glue, so I'm going to wipe that out. Okay, the rest of it looks okay. Alright, and then we take the engine block here. Alright, and we're just going to pop that inside, and then we're going to push it forward with the engine spacer up to our mark there, and then immediately pull that back out so that if there is any excess glue in the tube, we don't end up with the spacer getting stuck inside. Alright, next we need to mark where the fins will go, and so we just stick the tube here on the template and then make a little tick mark here for each one. Okay, now according to their instructions, they're just drawing upward from our marks here. I'm going to take the more conventional approach where you would take this against a straight edge. And so here I'm going to use my tube marking guide. Estes makes this. And traditionally you would use a door frame, but door frames are hard to get under my camera, so I'm just going to use this. Okay, and if I take a look here at my fin stock, this would be the root edge of one fin. Okay, so if I measure that very quickly here, alright, that's just under 6 centimeters there. So then if I put that here, alright, I'm going to measure it just beyond about 7 centimeters. It's going to be about here, and so I'm just going to line up my tick mark that I made earlier. Now just draw this out to about 7 centimeters. I want it to extend just a little bit beyond the actual length of the fin. Okay, and I'm just going to turn this and do the same thing for the other two. All right. You don't have to have heavy marks, just enough that you can see them. Okay, but that's going to make it a lot easier to align the fins when we get to that stage. Now, I misspoke earlier. This is not the root edge, it's the leading edge. The root edge is here, but that's okay. It's still, we have enough length in our line to show us where this goes. And so our next step here is to just go through here and cut through any remaining balsa along the lines here. Okay, and then you can discard the remaining balsa or stick it in a balsa junk drawer if you have one. And next I'm going to take all 3 fins and stack them together here. When the die cutting on these is a little bit rough, and so we're going to need some sanding. I'm going to just cut off that little bit of balsa there. Alright, so I'm just going to stack these so the edges are as even as I can get them, and then I'm just going to drag them across some fine sandpaper here so we get completely even fins. Alright, and then once you have that done, go ahead and sand the faces of the balsa, and here I recommend using a sanding block or a sanding tee so that you get a flat surface. Just sand with the grain here. So I've got all 3 of them sanded. If you need to, you can do a little more shaping there. The balsa that came with this has a really coarse grain and is really fibrous. So you may need to do a little more sanding there. Now typically with model rockets, we would normally round over or taper at least the leading edge of the fin in order to make it more aerodynamic. There's no mention of that in the instructions, and I think in part it's because this rocket's going to spin, and so it's not going to make a whole lot of difference whether the fins have squared off leading edges or rounded leading edges. The act of spinning the rocket is going to create a lot more drag anyway, and the amount of drag produced by the difference in airfoiling there is probably negligible. So I'm not going to worry about it here. I'm just going to go along with the instructions. Okay, now something else they don't mention is any type of treatment of the wood. And so they're just assuming you're going to use the balsa as is, glue it onto the rocket, and go from there. You may want to treat the fins with some sanding sealer or possibly pre-prime the fins before putting them on. That's up to you. I'm just going to follow the directions for the purposes of this video and go with what I've got. Okay. Now one thing I will add here is I'm going to lightly sand along my fin lines here. It doesn't require much, and you don't need to go all the way through. This is just taking off some of the gloss of the glassine layer on the tube, and this will help make the glue stick better. Okay, now something else that's going to be easier to do now. All right, according to the instructions, we put the fins on first and then the launch lug, and they're having us draw a line for the launch lug after the fins are on. I really don't recommend doing this. Okay, instead I recommend putting the launch lug line on here to begin with before we put the fins on. Now, since we didn't have a launch lug line on the fin marking guide, we're going to have to estimate this. Okay, now this needs to go up 1.5 inches from the aft end. So we'll go ahead and take a ruler once more. Okay, and so 1.5 inches would be at that point. So roughly here. Okay, and now I'm just going to eyeball it here. Okay, and estimate approximately where the midpoint between the two fin lines is. Okay, which appears to be right about here. And you can change this later. That's the nice thing about pencil, you can erase it. Okay, but now I'm going to put this back on my straight edge. Okay, my launch lug I can compare here, so that needs to go up to about there. And I'm going to draw a line that would go just a little bit beyond it to make it easier to align it. Okay, so I need to make it just a little bit longer. Okay, so that will be my launch lug line. And here again, I'm going to go ahead and rough that up as well. Okay, and so then when we do get to the launch lug part, it's going to be easier to put it on. So here we're going to take our wood glue or white glue once more. And what we want to do is put a thin film on the root edge. Okay, and so now I'm just going to take my finger and smooth this in. And the idea here is you don't want a whole lot of glue to start with. Okay, and now I'm going to place this on. So the back edge of the fin should go flush with the aft end of the rocket. like that. Alright, but now I'm going to take it right back off again. And now I'm going to wait 30 seconds or so for that glue to become tacky. Alright, my glue should be a bit tacky now, and now put the fin right back on where it was. And what this is doing is it makes the glue grab quicker so that you don't have to hold it in place while the glue dries. Alright, and so now I'm just making sure that my fin is perpendicular to the tube and aligned with the tube. Okay, and I'm going to let that dry. In fact, you can let it dry just like that. Okay, but let that dry for about 10 minutes at least before you go on to the next fin there. If you're using white glue, you may have to let it dry a little bit longer. But I'm going to let this dry, and I will do the other two fins off camera and then come back. While the fins are drying, I'm going to skip ahead here to step 7, which is the assembly of the nose cone. And the first thing I'm going to do is take some fine sandpaper here. This is 220 grit. And just using it with my fingers, smooth out the balsa. Because like the fins, this is a really coarse grained balsa. And I have noticed as I look ahead here that they do recommend using sanding sealer for the nose cone and the fins, but they don't recommend doing it until after you've got the rocket assembled. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Because it's a lot more chance of damaging something if we're trying to do this with everything in place. But we'll do it the way they did it. Okay, this is definitely going to need some sanding sealer or a whole lot of primer. And now we're going to take the screw eye. Okay, and just press it into the middle and then screw it in. If you're off center just a little bit, like it appears to be I am, it's not a big deal. Alright, now what I like to do with this type of nose cone is I've screwed it in but left the unthreaded shank exposed there. And now I'm going to unscrew it again. In just a moment, and I'll put a little blob of glue on the tip. And now I'm going to screw that back in. And this will just help hold the screw eye in place through the strains of launch and recovery. Okay, now I'm going to screw it down. I'm going to still leave a little bit of the shank exposed there, but I'm going to go in just a little bit deeper. Okay, and then I can smooth out that excess glue with my finger. I'm just going to kind of work it into the end of the balsa there. Okay, and now I can let this set aside to dry. And I'm still going to have to wait for my fins to finish drying before we can do any of the rest of this. My fins are dry enough to handle now, so I'm going to attach the launch lug next. Now in the instructions it shows putting on fillets before this, but I'm going to put the launch lug on first, and then I can apply the fillets to the launch lug and the fins all at the same time. So this is going to be very much like what we did with the fins, except you really don't need to pull it off to let it get tacky this time, because there's not a lot of tension on the launch lug. So we can just spread out the glue there. Alright, and apply it to our launch lug line. Alright, and now I'm just going to sight down the rocket to ensure that this is straight. Okay, and that looks pretty good. And so I'll let that dry as well. And when that part is dry, then we can come back and put the fillets on. The glue has set on the fins and on the launch lug. So now I'm going to apply the fillets. And you want to make sure you have some tissues or paper towels on hand. Your fingers are going to get really sticky here. And what I'm going to do is just apply a bead of glue along the inside joint here. And then take my finger and smooth that in. And then if you have excess here, you can apply it to the next fin, or in this case, the launch lug. And that's going to need some more too. Alright, and these fillets will help strengthen the attachment of the fins and the launch lug. They also help improve the aerodynamics of the rocket, although again with the spinning nature of this one, I don't think you'll notice it a whole lot. Just a little bit more in there. If you do get too much on it, just wipe it off quickly. Whoa! Okay, let me get that back on where it belongs. Guess that wasn't quite as set up as I thought. But this is one of the differences between white glue and wood glue, is the wood glue sets up faster, it's stronger, but you do have a lot less working time with it. Okay, and then once you've got one face done, if you put this on relatively low volume like I've done here, then you can just rotate it to the next face and do the next ones. Now if you want thicker fillets, it's going to be better to put on several layers than to try and do just one big thick layer, because the glue will run in the direction of gravity and you end up with lopsided or drippy looking fillets. Okay, and I'm just going to go on to the next one here. And as you can see, this will also fill in areas where the fin may not have attached itself uniformly all the way down. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and put a little more glue there on that launch lug. And at this point I'm just going to let it be, because I think if I try and spread any more it's just going to make it worse. So we can come back and improve the fillets if we need to. But I'm going to let this dry horizontally so that the glue does not run toward one end or the other. My fillets have dried, and our next task is now to put in the shock cord. The shock cord mount is here on the bottom of the front page of the instructions. And so here we can just take a ruler and your hobby knife or a pair of scissors and cut this out. Now you do want to make sure that there's nothing on the back side that we need yet. So we've already done all this. If you don't want to ruin your instructions, simply make a photocopy of this and cut that out. Okay, so just like that. And then we'll take our shock cord here. Right, and when we put this together, I'm going to put the shock cord on at a little bit of an angle here. So not straight down the mount like this, but more like this. Because this is going to fold over itself. And if you put it at an angle, this piece here will fold over and sit next to the piece that's coming out of the mount there. And so that will provide less of a bulge inside the rocket. So go ahead and take your wood glue or your white glue. Okay, and I'm first just going to put a bead of glue down along here. And you want this to be fairly heavy because we're going to squeeze the excess glue all throughout the mount. Okay, and then here, as I said, go ahead and put this at a bit of an angle. Alright, and then we're going to fold each number onto the next. So the number 1 here is going to get folded over onto number 2. And we're going to squish that glue around. Okay, and then we're going to fold number 2 over and onto number 3. And again, putting the previous piece of the shock cord there next to the piece coming out instead of directly on top of it. Alright, now I'm going to put a little bit of a bow to this, so if you look at it edge on, the idea here is to get this to fit inside the body tube as close as possible. Okay, and now we're going to add some more glue. And just go ahead and take your finger here and get a nice even film all the way around this. Because we want a good tight bond between the shock cord mount and the body tube. At the same time, we want to get it as flat as possible because this is a relatively small body tube. So we need to get this down at least this far. Okay, and the reason for that is to make sure that we've got good clearance between the shoulder of the nose cone, the body tube, and the shock cord mount. We don't want any of these hitting on each other. So I'm just going to bend this a little bit more and then slide it in. Try to keep the glue off the body tube to begin with, and just push that down. Okay. And go ahead and push it down as far as you can do it while still being able to put pressure on it. Alright, so right now the shock cord mount's about right here between my finger and the body tube. And now I'm just going to press between the two. Get rid of that excess glue there. So I'm using my hand and my little finger here to squeeze that onto the body tube and get the glue flowing all around it. Alright, I'm going to remove my finger there. Now just check down inside. Let's see if you can see that there, if we can get the light just right. Okay, so that's far enough down that it's not going to interfere with our nose cone. While the glue on the shock cord mount is drying, we can attach the streamer. And the instructions indicate just to tie one end of the streamer around the shock cord. I don't like to do that because it makes a big bulge in the streamer, and again, there's not a lot of room down inside that tube. So instead, I'm going to use a small piece of electrical tape here, and I want this to be about the same length as the width of the streamer. Okay, if it's a little longer or a little shorter, that's fine. So I'm going to take this and put it sticky side up and bring the streamer on just over a little under half of it there. And then I'm going to measure about a third to half of the way down my shock cord. Put that across the middle of the tape. And now I'm going to fold the tape over so that it traps the shock cord and the streamer in between. Okay, and this is going to give us a much flatter surface when we fold up the streamer to put it inside. I've done this on lots of models. This holds up really well. Usually the streamer will give out before the tape does. Okay, now when we go to put this away in the rocket, first we're going to simply fold this over its own length a couple of times. So we'll fold it in half and then bring that loop up and fold it in half like this. Whoops. And just keep doing this until you get to a manageable length. And as thin as this streamer is, you can almost fold it continuously. So when you get to about this length here, then I would go ahead and roll the rest of it. You'd probably give it another fold if you wanted to. Okay, and then this would simply go down into the rocket body tube. Now, since I still have wet glue in there, I'm not going to put it in yet. Okay, and then the last thing to do structurally is to put on the little spinner-ons here, and I've left these off intentionally for a bit, and then to tie this onto the nose cone screw eye. Okay, let's talk about finishing here. So in the instructions, basically it has you building the entire kit and then doing all the finishing at once, including things like masking this off so that you can paint the fins one color and paint the body another color. If you're trying to do the color scheme that is shown on the package here, so we'd have a white body down about 2/3 and then black fins and a black upper body and nose cone. I would actually do a lot of this painting before assembling. So you could pre-paint the fins black. You may have to go back and either mask the root edges so that you can glue them on, or you may have to sand or scrape off some of the paint there. And the same thing for the nose cone. Especially with it being a balsa nose cone, I would go ahead and finish it first. So do some sanding sealing to plug up the pores in the wood, and then paint it separately before you even attach it to the rocket. Okay, now since I've already built the rocket, I could go through and do all the masking. And so if you look in the instructions here, they show putting some masking tape down between the fins, masking off part of the body here. And so what they do is prime the entire rocket, then paint it white, and then mask off the parts that are going to remain white and paint the whole thing black. Okay, now the other thing, and something I wanted to wait on as well, is these little spinner-ons here go on to the trailing edges of the fins. Okay, and this is a reason to leave your fins squared off at the trailing edge rather than rounded, so these fit better. Alright, and you put these in the middle and make sure they're all facing the same direction, like this, so the angled veins there are all going the same direction as you go around. Okay, and just adjust them so they're all centered here. And so they show doing this before you paint the fins. But if you look at their illustration, they actually paint the spinnerons a different color. So I would recommend, if you're going to paint the spinnerons, is just take them off, paint them separately. Okay, now you have the option of gluing these on permanently, which, if you're going to do that, I recommend painting them first. Try to keep paint out of this inside groove here, and then after the rocket's painted, glue these on with super glue. If you use something like white glue, it'll have a harder time sticking to the plastic. And if you do it before you paint it, the cyanoacrylate or super glue doesn't hold well to the wood. Okay. Alternatively, as long as these are fitting nice and snugly, I would just leave it friction fit so that if you decide, you can take them off and fly the rocket without spinning. Okay, so that part's up to you. I actually like the black color and the 3D printed texture that's on these. I'm just going to leave them alone on my rocket. Okay, so the last thing to do, and again, you may want to do this after you paint the nose cone, but we need to attach the shock cord here, and this is just a matter of tying a double knot or 2 half hitches onto this. Okay, and then you can add just a little drop of white glue or wood glue to the knot. Just a little tiny bit there, and you're just going to work that into the knot. Okay, and that'll help keep it from untying. If you have much more than this amount of elastic here still left, you might want to cut that off until it's that size or a little bit shorter. And that's just to keep it from getting caught up between the shoulder of the nose cone and the body tube when you put this together. So at this point, this rocket is structurally finished and just needs to be painted and have the decal applied to it. I am not going to do that in this video because it's currently winter where I am, and painting is very difficult to do. So with that, hope you had a good time putting this together. Have a great flight and a safe recovery, and please watch my next video.